Hello everyone. Sexual reproduction in flowering plants. Subtopic pollination. What is pollination? Pollination is nothing but the mechanism of the transfer of the pollen grains to the stigma of the flower, right? So that is called as pollination. Then, depending on the source of pollen and the pollination can be divided into three types. So, there are different types of the pollination. Let's see the types of the pollination. So, here the first one, autogamy. What is autogamy? Autogamy, in this type, the pollination is achieved by within the same flower, means the flower that is contain both uh, the male reproductive structure and the female reproductive structure. The transfer of the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower. So here it transfers the pollen grains from the same anther to the stigma of the same flower. In a normal flower which opens and exposes the anthers and the stigma, complete autogamy is rather rare. Autogamy in such flowers requires synchrony in the pollen release and the stigma receptivity. So in the autogamy, the pollen grains and the stigma that should be ready. So that is called as the synchrony in the release of the pollen and the stigma receptivity. So, and the anthers and the stigma should lie close to each other so that self pollination occur. So these are the points where the autogamy, when the autogamy will occur, when there is a release of the pollen grain and the stigma receptivity, that is together, there is a synchrony, and there is the both the stigma and the anthers, they lie close together, so that then only the autogamy is possible. Some plants like viola and oxalis and commelina produce two types of the flowers. So, Chasmogamous flowers and the Cleistogamous flowers. Chasmogamous flowers means, so these are the Chasmogamous flowers and these are Cleistogamous flowers. What are these Chasmogamous flowers? So, which has the exposed anther and the stigma. The flower which has the exposed anther and stigma. But Cleistogamous flowers which do not open at all, such flowers, the anther and stigma lie close to each other. So in the Cleistogamous flowers, there is no chance of the cross pollination. So there is self pollination and there is a autogamy in the Cleistogamous flowers. So when the anthers dehisce in the flower buds, the pollen grains come in contact with the stigma to effect the pollination. So thus Cleistogamous flowers are invariably autogamous because there is no chance of cross pollination and landing of the pollen grains on the stigma because they do not open at all, and here the pollination is called as self pollination because the release of the pollen grain and the stigma receptivity that takes place at the same time. So the Cleistogamous flowers produce assured seed set even the absence of the pollinators. So these Cleistogamous flowers, they do not need the pollinators. In the absence of the pollinator also they are able to produce the seeds. And the second type, that is Geitonogamy. What is Geitonogamy? Autogamy means within the same flower, right? But here the transfer of the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the another flower of the same plant. Means here the species are same. Okay. So for example, this is brinjal plant and this is also brinjal plant. Okay, so this brinjal plant which releases the pollen grains, this pollen grains transferred to the another brinjal plant flower stigma of the another flower, of the same species plant, that is called as Geitonogamy. So this is functionally cross pollination but genetically same species, right? So it is called as genetically autogamy but functionally it is cross pollination. Then the third type, that is xenogamy. What is xenogamy? Transfer of the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the different plant, not the same plant. Transfer of the pollen grains to the stigma of the different plant. This is only type of pollination which during the pollination brings genetically different types of the pollen grains to the stigma. So here the genetically different types of the pollen grain that is transferred to the stigma, that is called as xenogamy. So these are the main three types of the pollination. The first one autogamy, second one Geitonogamy, and the third one xenogamy. Yes. So here you can see the self-pollination. So where the anther and stigma which lie close together, and the release of the pollen grain and the stigma receptivity at the same time. So that is called as the self-pollination. Say the cross-pollination. So this anther, if the flower is having the same male reproductive structure as well as female reproductive structure, but there is no synchrony in the release of the pollen grain and the stigma receptivity. So the pollen grains that is transferred to the stigma of the another flower where the stigma is ready to receive the pollen grains. So this type of pollination that is called as cross pollination. Thank you.